There he is, the young golden boy, hailed by Robert Schumann and his wife Clara as fated to give expression to the times in the highest and most ideal manner. And that picture of Schumann from 1850 is an actual daguerreotype photograph. And that picture of Brahms in 1853 is the year of that note of praise. But that next year saw him begin his first symphony that took him 21 years to finish. What was the problem? It was that dead Beethoven, who he had never met. Brahms was on record as saying, "I shall never compose a symphony. You have no conception of how the likes of us feel when we hear the tramp of a giant like him behind us." Of course, that tramping could have been made only by a hedgehog.
Or perhaps a Pianosaurus,
as he's seen here in a silhouette going off to his favorite bar by that name. Here shown much later in his life, in his bearded face, which would have been sometime from 1878 on. Born in 1833 in North Germany, in Hamburg of Hamburger fame, here's Brahms's rather folkish urban birthplace in Hamburg. This is a photo from 1891, towards the end of his life, and the building was destroyed during a bombing in World War II. Like Scott Joplin, Brahms supposedly played in brothels in his youth. There are those that dispute this, but the stories actually go back to tales related by Brahms himself to Clara Schumann. And speaking of the Schumanns, the year after Robert Schumann's praise of Brahms, and that would be 1854, and that was, of course, the year that Brahms started his first symphony, Schumann threw himself in the Rhine River, attempting suicide. He wound up in the Endenich Asylum near Bonn and lingered for 2 years before dying of pneumonia in 1856. Meanwhile, Brahms sort of looked after Clara Schumann and the family. Clara only saw Robert once on his deathbed, and Brahms pretty much fell in love with Clara. It was supposedly a platonic relationship. You never know. Here's a picture of her much later in life, and she dies actually in 1896, just the year before Brahms. She was herself an expert composer and pianist and was a proponent of Brahms's and Robert's work. Brahms made a big splash in 1859 with his first piano concerto. Great work. Evidently it started as sketches to a symphony and then went somewhere else. This was the same year that he became engaged to Agatha von Siebold, and the engagement was broken off fairly soon. Nonetheless, a letter survives that says, "I love you. I must see you again, but I am incapable of bearing letters. Please write me, whether I may come again to clasp you in my arms, to kiss you, and to tell you that I love you." And they never saw one another again. And Brahms later confirmed to a friend that Agatha was his last love. Well, maybe. He meets Wagner in 1863. Initially, they were cordial, but eventually Brahms becomes known as the conservative to Wagner as the liberal, and have quite a falling out. Meanwhile, back in that key year, 1854, Peter Cornelius had come up with the notion of the 3 Bs, and he meant Bach, Beethoven, and Berlioz as the new progressive. Eventually, Hans von Bülow commandeers that phrase and makes the 3rd B Brahms. But there's a tale to be told before that, and that is that von Bülow had really dedicated his life to music because he had heard Wagner's Tannhäuser. He was a close associate of Franz Liszt as well. Liszt and Wagner were, of course, good buddies. And Bülow eventually marries Liszt's daughter, Cosima, and Bülow is a great proponent of Wagner's music, conducting it regularly. But Wagner started having an affair with Cosima. Von Bülow and Cosima had married in 1857, and they had a couple of kids. But then the kids started happening on the Cosima Wagner side, with the birth of a very Wagnerian named Isolde in 1865, and then they had another daughter, and the affair was open knowledge. Bulow did not grant, that's what you had to do back then, grant a divorce, but finally in 1870, after the birth of Siegfried, that was evidently too much for Bulow, and he finally divorced Cosima, and he also jumped ship in terms of his allegiance. Liszt and Wagner were basically the proponents of the music of the future, and despite the fact that in many ways Brahms is progressive, he was considered a classicist, an absolute musician working in such forms as, of course, concerto and now symphony. So it was the year after the premiere of Brahms's First Symphony that von Bülow wrote that it was the 10th, meaning Beethoven's 10th symphony. And indeed there are some correspondences. They're both in C minor, and the final movement has an heroic theme in C major that seems to be redolent of the old Beethoven 9 classic melody in D major. And it was not long after that, say maybe 3 years later, in 1880, when von Bülow went on record as conceiving a kind of holy trinity of classical music, Batman, to wit, I believe in Bach the Father, Beethoven the Son, and Brahms the Holy Ghost of music. And he also had this deal, maybe it was earlier, a pun to a friend, talking about the fact that the letter B was also the notion of flat sign. The 3 B's, he said, my musical creed is the key of E flat major and contains 3 B's, the flats, in its key signature, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. And finally, the Symphony Number 4, our featured piece, his last symphony. He's on the short list of composers writing 4 symphonies with his old pal Robert Schumann, and will have Ives in the 20th century with 4 numbered symphonies. So, first movement, a rather languorous sonata allegro. Second movement, Wikipedia says Hypo-Phrygian. I'd just settle for Phrygian, and that would be an E Phrygian of do, do, ra, mi, do, te, le, do. Nice. We haven't really had a whole lot of modes since way back when, right? That last movement was a modified sonata allegro, no development. And he likes his sonata allegro because here we are in the third movement, nominally a dance, but it is in 2/4, not 3/4, and it is in sonata allegro too. First little themelet coming down is all in C major. Do, ti, la, so, fa, so, do, ti, la, fa, re, mi. And then there's a very low la. Nice. Contrary motion against that. Do, mi, fa, so, la, so, do, mi, fa, re, so, mi, fa. Sorry, too low for me. Second little themelet is this 2/16 and 8th notes. Dig-a-dig, 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 dig. And then the third little themelet, da, 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 with the triplets. So there's the fourth one there. A little more lyrical. And upon that, then we go back to the first and the second. Amongst the clever things is when the first little themelet initially returns, it's in contrary motion to the first contrary motion, meaning the lower melody of Do, mi, fa, sol, la, so is now the upper, and do, ti, la, so, fa, so is now in the basses. Very nice, very clever. Here's the second theme. So, so, do, re, mi, re, ti, so. Clearly outlining tonic and dominant. And notice Brahms is not all that fancy in terms of orchestration. He's right in the Beethoven tradition. You get a melody, give it to the violins. Maybe a little contrast, add it to the flutes, and can't argue with a good tutti. Yes, and Tricks of the Trade development looks like the exposition, but then note those comparatively longer notes that divide and conquer Beethoven approach. Ah, yes, and later in the development, somewhat like Beethoven from the Third Symphony, we have what seems to be a new theme, but it really is based on the third little themelet. It's that triplet figure of da, 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 now da, 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 da. And because of that, the recapitulation does start with the triplet action rather than right at the beginning. Again, very clever. fourth movement, Passacaglia theme and variations. Again, rather clever. Again, the model could be Beethoven, who does use theme and variations sometimes in his finales. This Passacaglia also, going back to the Baroque, some people have called this a chaconne. It's a series of 8 chords, and it is cycled through a magnificent number of variations, no less than 30. When I wrote my Cliff variations, I used this as the basis, and let me tell you, Brahms is quality through and through.